This is our 5th episode recording outside. How do you feel about it, Alicia?
I'm loving it. I like that every week there's really beautiful background noise, and every week I get to debut a full outfit.
Do you find it distracting when people walk by and look at us? I like it because of the frustrations of recording inside. Things are always very claustrophobic, and here we get a nice kind of preparatory march before we get into recording mode.
Yeah.
Which is pleasant. I don't like it because of bugs and that thing that you just observed on me. What did you say that was?
They look like little burrs.
Burrs.
Yeah.
And you said I shouldn't remove them because they're good luck.
Yeah. I made that up, but
okay.
They still seem like they're good luck.
So, welcome back to Solacene, everybody. Today we are continuing our discussion on the news. I'm going to take the shades off, actually, because I feel too silly when I wear them. We're talking about how the media shapes elections, which is obviously quite topical.
Indeed. We wanted to talk about the relationship between democracy and freedom of the press, and we decided we're going to leave propaganda and those more heavy aspects of this relationship to do entire episodes on, because I think they're worthy of that. So,
well, we were kind of outlining this episode last night, and I said we should probably mention the word propaganda, and then we kind of looked at each other and thought, maybe that deserves its whole episode rather than being a footnote. Although I think we'll be talking around it a lot today, and I also think even the definition of that word is kind of muddy these days because it's like people use it a little bit lightly, perhaps. But we'll talk about that. So for today, we are discussing how the media shapes elections. But first, Alicia has a plug that she wanted to mention.
Yes, I wanted to give you some Solacene news and some news in Montreal because we have the platform to do so. So this week, with Solacene on Saturday and Sunday, August 3rd and 4th, we're going to be at the Montreal Makers Market, which is a pretty big pop-up market. There's going to be like 80 vendors there, and I encourage anyone in Montreal to come visit us and visit all the beautiful vendors who will be there as well. This has been a dream of mine since moving to Montreal, to be a part of a Montreal Makers Market, and the fact that we get to do that is really lovely. We'll be doing our zines, and our sustainably made circular clothing will be there, and you also get to see the really sick tablecloth that I made for our table.
Oh yeah, that is really nice.
And then one other thing this week is on Thursday night, we're going to be doing another climate circle. So if you are in Montreal every Thursday, me in connection with the Climate Connect organization headed by the beautiful Vanya, we are going to be doing a climate circle in Jean Mance Park, and come and visit us there. And we'll be making seed bombs and doing a bit of a solar punk talk. We have a guest speaker this week, so
yeah, come meet with us on Thursday. We'll teach you how to make bombs of a sort.
Yes.
My only caveat would be if you see me at either events, I'm a lot more wooden in real life, even more so than on the podcast, let's put it like that, and also smaller. If you watched last week's video and you saw me looking like I filled the entire frame, it was an illusion. I'm not twice the size of Alicia. So, how the media shapes elections or influences or affects or narrativizes, I guess, depending on your level of animosity towards said media. I thought it was very important to start with definitions because almost every word in that sentence is quite big. So, elections, I think that's the easiest definition. A formal and organized choice by vote of a person for a political office or other position. Do you dispute that?
I don't dispute that. That feels quite straightforward.
Yeah, I already mentioned that the verb we're using, shapes, is kind of up to one's opinion. But the media was the main thing that I wanted to try and nail down because I think that in 2024, it's maybe more muddled a category than it has perhaps ever been. I had a little crisis when we had the premise of doing the episode, and I was like, well, what's the media? Are you and I the media? Meaning Solacene, which is almost certainly not the case because this will get 9 views on YouTube if we're lucky. But that we know that other podcasts are considered media if they maybe breach a certain threshold of influence or viewership. and it's kind of like there's a line that something crosses before it becomes a part of the media, or is it just a part of the establishment media? I don't know. And this is without wanting to sound like Jordan Peterson talking about climate, because I think that was a very...
It's all media.
Yeah. What is climate anyway? Well, what is climate? First, we have to define that. Climate's everything.
For me, I'll try and draw a line. I want to say any individual or organization with an audience greater than 75,000.
75,000?
Yeah.
I think that's
You think
a
even
very
smaller?
high bar, yeah.
Yeah?
I think these days you'd be really surprised about how many people get their news or keep up with the Joneses on quite small podcasts or YouTube channels.
Okay. Fair enough. So,
But maybe that's not the case. I don't know.
perhaps 10,000.
10G.
Yeah.
I had the internet definition of
Oh, okay.
the main means of communication, broadcasting, publishing, and the internet regarded collectively. So when you kind of narrow it to news media, it says the press is a designation of media vehicles that carry out journalism and other functions of informative communication, in contrast to pure propaganda or entertainment communications. And also, it's only quite recently, in the second half of the 20th century, that people would say the media is versus the media are. Like the media is singular became the dominant form. And I think that might be because people started to lump everything together and recognize it as, maybe it's because of like the fact that only a few big corporations own a lot of them in America and that kind of stuff. So maybe people started to recognize that there's a kind of uniformity to these, but I think we should go back to the media are. So I think this should be how the media shape election, not shapes.
Okay.
Because that recognizes the plurality of everything. It's CNN, the legacy stuff, it's Joe Rogan, the new stuff, and it's also...
The random, like, Instagrammer who has a big following.
Yeah, sure. If there's a political one of those.
Yeah. But my thinking when it comes to media is that because politics have become so prolific in our collective consciousness, even the homesteading Instagrammer who's just posting cottagecore, chicken, cow things, to an extent have become people who are political actors, because when an election rolls around, they'll often post a bit of information about how they believe you should vote.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's no clear boundary anymore between entertainment and just communicating the facts.
Yeah, if there ever was. But yeah, I agree, it's definitely a blurry line, and influencers will, almost to a T, like, at some point endorse somebody.
Mm-hmm.
We were all wondering what Gordon Ramsay was thinking about this upcoming election. Maybe it's a bit of unfair to call him an influencer. Or these days, I don't know, is he a culinary influencer? You decide. I also think there's this weird little contrarian strand we see often in politics now, where people will refer to media, or like mainstream media, as almost a pejorative for that media which they don't like, or they don't agree with. So it's like, oh, well, the mainstream media will say this, but if you listen to X, it's like, but if 100,000 people are also listening to X, how is that not mainstream?
Niche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even if it were, I don't think that makes someone necessarily superior, but I think that's how we all kind of subconsciously feel now.
That makes sense.
Like, oh, you're watching CBC? No,
Yeah.
you got to watch this person on YouTube.
I was doing a bit of digging into the definitions as well of the different types of media, and it was saying that the most common place that people get their information is still TV and print, and I dispute that very highly, because maybe it's the people that are answering polls or what have you, but I think even your grandma is getting their information on Facebook. Yeah.
The Facebook word uttered for the first time 12 minutes into the episode, and hopefully not uttered again, because I don't want to talk. Maybe we'll use that for the propaganda episode. We'll talk about Zuck. But mostly I wanted to kind of flip this question, how the media shapes elections, back on us, and try and consider the media, or posit it as more of like this all-consuming web of which its viewers these days are kind of complicit. I think that's the genie out of the bottle that social media has brought. So it's kind of like, are we asking the right question? Because none of these media institutions, big, small, whatever, exist in a vacuum. They always exist in a feedback loop with their viewers. And I think there's obviously the meta conversation that all of us as viewers were shaped by the media from a young age, but kind of disregarding that, I just think it misses the point entirely to talk about how newspapers sensationalize this or they're corrupt in this way, and journalism practices are devolving in this way, without considering the fact that it's us as viewers who allow that, in maybe not too dissimilar away from when we talk about ultra-processed food at the supermarket, sugary cereals and that kind of stuff. It's like, well, people don't have to buy that.
Yeah.
I think that's, it's a lot more nuanced than that, and that's a little bit unfair, but I do think there's some responsibility that should be placed on us as viewers.
I think so. So you're basically arguing for free will versus against it.
Cool. I don't know. Am I?
Yeah. I think I agree. We also have to remember that the institutions creating the content that we consume in the news cycle these days are also just people. And
yeah, that's another thing.
This is why we have the concept of Solacene, the beautiful, sustainable, tactile future of where we can maybe talk about. So in the Solacene, I think that the people making up the organizations will not be trying to just sell the way that they are now, but also the people consuming it or reading the news will not give in to these tricks, because we do have a choice to just turn it off, to just not engage with it. And I think the belief that we tell ourselves is, well, I grew up with this, it's addicting, and yes, it has addictive properties, but more so than a lot of other addictive behaviors, it's a bit easier to just
that was kind of when I was poking holes in my sugar analogy. It's like, because people might say, well, we need to eat, and this is typically cheapest, and I would say fair enough. But with the news, you don't actually need to engage in it at all. That's a dangerous proposition, but maybe distancing yourself is better than reading tabloids, for instance. Maybe no news is better than bad news, is what I'm saying.
I agree. Or take a bit of a fast of the news and then come back and you'll see a bit how broken it is. I was listening to a podcast yesterday of someone who fasted the internet and came back and they realized they wrote a book on cancel culture, and they were talking about how when you take a step back from it, you realize that it's just like people attacking people and just like being harmful instead of being constructive. And she's like a restorative justice activist, so that's what she was talking about. But it was interesting to see her say she just took like a couple weeks off, and then when you come back into it, you realize how unnecessary a lot of it is. But I think I liked the sugar analogy because, yeah, you have to eat, and that's why people hesitate to call any foods addictive. But with the news, if you want to live in a democracy, which most of us do, we all desire to be a part of a democratic society, you have to engage with political information at least, because you want to be an informed voter and you want to be an informed citizen when you're voting on policy or when you are attending a town hall. But right now we're at a point where we almost can't engage with the information because it's so negative and so pessimistic that you then don't vote, you don't show up to policy meetings because you can't be informed without being overwhelmed.
What a quote. If someone were to ever get something that you said on this podcast tattooed, how would you feel about that?
Unhappy.
Guilty?
Yeah. I'll always try and speak slightly off so that they won't get it tattooed.
Yeah, always try and speak with a little bit of a grammatical error in every sentence. That's my aim. But I like the distinction you made between individuals and the organizations they work for. That might be the good kind of line when something becomes part of the media. Because you and I talking, like Solacene is just a name that we've chosen for this podcast. It kind of directs us because we always try and talk in a positive way, and that's what Solacene is synonymous with. But pretty much it's just Aaron and Alicia sitting on a rock talking, and it could be named anything, and we'd be talking the same way. There might not even need to be a camera or microphones, and we'd be talking, the content of the conversation would be very similar. Whereas when you watch Tucker Carlson, he's not still at Fox, so maybe it's even a better example. He will, when he's on air, on a Fox News segment or on his own show, he's talking with an allegiance to toe the Fox News line, most certainly. And when he's off air, he's talking like Tucker, presumably. I mean, he might also be paid in other ways, but, like there's a difference between the private person's thought and their public persona as a pundit, or the same with politicians, right? Like Trump, I think, is a good example, because pre-running for president, I think he identifies as a Democrat or something like that. So there's the person's personal opinions on stuff, and then there's the allegiance or kind of pressure, conformity they may feel as part of the media organization. So maybe that's a good clarification. I had 5 answers to the question how the media shape singular elections, and I think with each one we can just kind of discuss it and go off in different areas, and whatever you talked about, we can hopefully try to resolve some of the issues a little bit. I know people might be thinking like, what are you guys going to do? Well, just watch. So the number one way, and the most observant, no one will have realized this, what the media does to shape elections, it tells us what's happening.
Yes.
And in doing so, I think kind of down the line, it makes us ever more reliant on the media to know what's happening. Because you and I and almost everyone who knows the name has never seen Trump, never seen Trudeau, never even seen, like the mayor of Montreal's name is Valérie Plante. Shout out Valérie Plante, because I like her last name. Although you did see Valérie. Weren't you telling me that?
I didn't see her.
Oh, you saw. Okay.
No,
Her entourage came into your place of work.
Yes.
So you may be at some point meeting Valérie.
Yes, exciting.
But so we don't know these people. All we know of them is what we see through the media. So it's a very effective and very necessary system, because obviously if we want to be citizens of the world and engage with systems like democracy or politics, we can't just rely on our senses all the time. So it's necessary to have secondary information relayed through the internet or through the media. But it also has the side effect of rendering a lot of its characters as just that, characters as if they're in a TV show. So I think that's a kind of awkward distancing. And also, obviously, there's the thing where, because we're reliant on the media, we only see what we're shown, so they can be quite selective. And I think this is why people really, young people especially, have very much taken to the new media, where you can watch an unedited 3-hour interview with a candidate, rather than the maybe biased snippets which get cut together and put on the morning news or in the papers the next morning. So
Yeah.
that's and Twitter is a good example also, because they can communicate directly, almost without the middleman.
I agree. I think in the current state, like, we will always need people to communicate to us information. But in the Solacene, the solution may be layers of government, so that you go to your local town hall and you are able to engage with someone who engaged with the Prime Minister.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, kind of my only solution to this is always try to find as much humanity in this massive system as you can. So, for instance, I've never had anyone knock on my door and say, "Have you heard about this candidate?" But that kind of stuff, there are a lot, that's kind of the grassroots dream of politics, I think.
I was going to do that actually during the last election.
Really?
Be the person who goes door to door, but then it was
For
the
whom?
pandemic. For the NDP party in Nova Scotia.
You like the orange?
I like the orange, yes.
Is that a Solacene endorsement? No.
No, it was
Not
just
technically.
they were looking for people to do it, and I was like, yeah, I wouldn't do it for most parties, but the green or the orange I would do.
We just refer to them all by their colors.
Yeah.
green, orange, red, blue.
Yes. I think also, this is obviously a degrowth perspective of how the media could evolve, is in the Solacene. So you have there'll always be a centralized government, and then branches of it going smaller and smaller. And I think the local journalism can still be reporting on national policy and national politicians and things like this, but you'll know the local journalists, so you'll know them. Perhaps they took a trip to Washington and then they came home, and like it's a bit more personal in that way, instead of there being one centralized speaker for the whole country, because that doesn't work. We know it doesn't work, especially for countries as big as Canada and the United States, of having the Globe and Mail, and that's like everybody across the country reads it. But you'd have the Montrealan Mail, and you would have a bit more idea of who these journalists are, the option to meet them at local hearings and stuff. And I also read this interesting thing about how at the beginning of the internet, people were really excited about its potential for politics. People were excited because it could democratize the access to information and access to the politicians.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think it has done that to an extent, is what I'm saying with Twitter. Like, it's not just Trump and Biden who have their Twitter accounts. I'm sure Valerie Plante does, and our local politicians do as well.
yeah, and like it has in that extent, but people got really cynical about it because it got so, it's like the power was spreading out,
Yeah.
but then those who had like the legacy media companies and those who already had a lot of concentrated power snatched it all up and
they do their
organized
best
themselves.
to consolidate it.
So there was no real democratization with the internet. And also apparently at the early days, like this is a paper I read from 1998, so this is like pre-internet as we know it.
This is pre you and I.
Yes, it is. People were like calling into like virtual town hall meetings, and they were calling into like political talk shows. They were really fired up. But then, yeah, they got so cynical that people just stopped engaging with these types of things in a non-sensationalist way.
I still have hope. I just think, like, for instance, what the internet should have done by now is kind of, in like America's a good case study, we'll be referring to it watching this episode, is propelled a or many third-party candidates to a debate stage, a national debate stage. And it could well have done so with, like, your Andrew Yangs and all these other dudes who it seems every election there's an internet traction behind them, but the TV and CNNs largely ignore them for reasons of vested interests. So I think it kind of is like, it's like this, it needs enough momentum to break out of that kind of, if the kind of natural gravitational pull of like the establishment, i.e. in the USA, we have two people on a debate stage. But I think at some point the internet I have hope anyway. It's one of the few things I have hope about the internet for. I was also just thinking regarding this, like, having a diversity of news both in the world and in one's life is important because, as I said, they'll be selective with what they each show, so you can kind of read between the lines. And I just think it's about becoming an educated, like, critical reader, and especially not algo insulating. That's a term that I coined.
Okay.
It means letting the algorithm push you further and further into narrower, more secluded, and often more extreme points of view, where you're surrounded only by those kind of news. My second point, so the media tells us what's happening. I think also it makes us sensation addicts, is the term I use, or it shifts the bar of normalcy. I think people call this the Overton window, but it's as if we are, when you're always reading the news every day and multiple times a day, you're kind of chasing the high of sensation. Yeah, and maybe it's similar to other kinds of entertainment where, oh, that person's a really cool breakdancer, but over time you become very, very accustomed to that. So your bar of being impressed by breakdancing is something ever crazier. Like, I used to watch America's Got Talent. You used to watch that too. We were both AGT fiends, in fact. And I just think when you watch that season by season and you see like contortionists or extreme strength acts or whatever it may be, by like the 9th season, you're kind of yawning and saying, I've seen that before, which is not, I don't like that. I think we are exposed too much in entertainment circles and also perhaps in political circles. I actually had a poem I wrote about this, if you don't mind my sharing.
I don't mind.
First, I will put on my poetry glasses, poetry goggles. So it says, next morning, same birds, old bread, fresh song, and a peace upon this weathered pair of hands, piece by piece spread far, little brown beaks in awe. There's been a death in his family, and the morning goes thus. Remove my poetry goggles to explain. It's just something about like the joy that animals feel always about the exact same thing. And the death in his family is, I don't know exactly, but it's something about the idea that one can be healed through nature and kind of realign themselves with the natural rhythms of like being happy about the same things every day, something like that.
I like this. There's I remembered this anecdote of, I don't remember what newspaper it was once printing, there's no news today. Remember that?
I love that.
Yeah, but I think we need to go back to a bit of, there's no news today. Just go about your day, there's no news. And I had a Solacene solution for this, and I said, curation without sensationalization, because...
Another tattoo idea for the listeners.
Because at the moment, the news, when it's being presented to us, it's sensationalized, it's polarizing. Sometimes it's very trivial because there's no news today, but they're like, did you see that Biden walked out on stage wearing a blue tie instead of a red tie?
Obama's infamous tan suit.
Yeah.
Which I like. I
Fair.
like brown suit.
But this is making it unreliable, and you want the information you're consuming surrounding politics to be reliable, and it can just be neutral, like presenting the facts. And this is really hard because of our it's evolving day by day to be more and more polarizing, but like 50 years ago, it was a bit more easy to just present the facts. And I don't even know if it's even something that was ever pure in the past. There's always been money involved in media outlets and people trying to just sell papers or sell you to be on the internet. But I think the original kind of journalist standard was that their goal is to make people act, to make people feel like they have a choice to get involved. But a lot of journalists lately, when asked about this journalistic pillar, they said, no, our goal is to drive people to stay on the social media platforms longer, not to make them
of course.
go out and act.
A good example is that reputable news institutions, or formerly reputable, will now use the YouTube or BuzzFeed clickbait style of like, Trump slams Biden for blah, 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 like capitalizing words in the headlines. It's like, this is ridiculous.
So I think action and neutral tone are very important too.
I mean, the thing is, when things are sensational, they should be presented sensationally.
Yeah.
But it's difficult, and I think the only way out of it is, or it only changes via an enlightened population about this kind of stuff. This is what I mean by some of the responsibilities on the people. Because it's not like this is going to be regulated, or it's not like newspapers will suddenly say, actually, we're going to go really mild from now on, because they're not collectively all going to do that. But it only changes when we, the readers, say like enough's enough with the capitalization and the terrible thumbnails, or the alternatives that things get sensationalized to the point of exhaustion, which is what happened with me and why I stopped reading the news at all, because you just start to yawn at all the, like every single day something is the most extreme or dramatic news thing.
Well, we were
ever.
talking about this a bit, like this week was the assassination attempt on Trump. And it's like, that is wild that happened.
But it's presented in the same way every week, so you don't really know when to care or whatever. Or you just find it hard to care, should I say.
Yeah.
And I think like this is a good way, almost, not literally shapes, but this is the way it almost literally shapes elections from like a narrative point of view, is that it crafts these stories, and humans are kind of naturally attuned to seek out the most exciting stories.
Yeah.
No one wants the most boring story, so I think it's that like tabloidization. We're making up a lot of words on this episode. Maybe that's already a word. And along these lines, I think is the fact that the news will amplify fringe opinions, often when they have nothing else to report. It's like, well, we found 3 people on Twitter who actually really are soaking their bread in water before they make a PB&J. And then we'll just post it like, people on TikTok are doing X. It's like, it was one person who posted this to try and get attention, and you gave it to them. And I think that can also be applied not just to silly food stuff, but also to politics. You can kind of extrapolate that.
Absolutely, because there'll be one fringe activist group that has a very strong opinion on something, and then they will work really hard to get a story about them, and then people will read it and be like, whoa, people think this?
Yeah, and it's difficult because it's the news's responsibility to talk about that kind of stuff. But it's when they do it, it's when they say, and it's usually quite obvious when you kind of take a step back and look at it, when it's clearly comes from a place of like, we need something to fill this.
Yeah.
We need something to fill this, so let's look for X, instead of saying, as you put, there's no news today. That constancy always requires new inputs or new slop, and it's like the Ouroboros eating its own tail. And also they create their own stories. So like there might be a source's say or pulling a quote out of context, and well, that can fill a day because we can find some people to kind of waffle about that for a couple hours, and we can try and get the Speaker of the House or another senator's reaction on that, and then we can get a reaction to that reaction, and hopefully we can try and craft a story which we'll be first to, and will occupy people for a week until something real happens or something like that. You see it all the time also in sports media. Like that will often thrive on like, one player said this very innocuous thing in a post-match conference about, yeah, we're really hoping we'll beat them. And then it will be blown out of proportion. Like, oh, they're really hoping they're going to beat this team. And then they'll ask the opposition team's manager, oh, what do you think about that? Well, I actually think this. And then they'll try and escalate it further and further. And I think, again, you can extrapolate that to politics. And there it's actually dangerous. Or at least actually, I don't know, it just makes you kind of queasy. But I don't know, the solution to this, I suppose, is just less news or less intrusive news in our lives. We talked about the benefits of having newspaper frequency, once a day, a couple times a week, once a week, something like that.
I have a suggestion.
Okay.
Get a hobby. Because I feel like talking about news as entertainment is a bad hobby. Talking about politics is a good hobby.
Yeah.
But you need to have a bit of education, and news can provide that education, but it doesn't at the moment. And it's fun to talk about politics with people.
What should I say? Should you say, sorry to correct you, but lots of it doesn't. I don't like talking about it as like a...
That's true.
There's a lot of good news outlets.
Yes.
SolarScene being one of them.
For sure. Yeah, get a hobby, and then if there's no news today, be like, if you were planning on meeting up with your political friend, be like, oh, there's nothing going on. So either rehash some historical, philosophical debate, or throw around a frisbee.
But I want to actually even rephrase what I just said. Like when I said there's a lot of good news outlets, I mean, most news outlets do a lot of good. I don't think there are many that are entirely good, nor even entirely bad. But I think, yeah, we should always be critical of the ones that, like if you're a dedicated New York Times reader, I think you should be kind of critical of them, even more so perhaps. Fourth thing I thought, how the media shapes elections, is that they have vested, i.e. monetary interests in many ways. And this is more of a circumstance which underlies all the other impacts they have rather than a specific action. But I mean, there's biases and funding and endorsements of particular parties and ties to certain other organizations and, you know, that whole web of stuff. And I guess the solution to this is just transparency. It's always interesting to see who owns these corporations. I always like looking into that. So
yeah, I think transparency is really important, and continuing the multi-directional communication that the internet has sparked, I think. because that is something really cool. It used to just be very top down, but now you can have people on the ground, people from within the House of Commons tweeting out. Like, I think that's
Exactly.
interesting to have transparency in that way.
And someone, not saying he's a good person or an interesting person, but I saw this tweet that was like about Elon Musk saying, it was before he owned the website, I think, and it was saying like, this is the only kind of Fortune 500 CEO or whatever who will be seen directly interacting with randos in their Twitter comments, which is, I think it's true, and I always thought that was kind of interesting. Not saying it's admirable or good, but politicians can literally just find some rando in their comments who's asking a question, and they can actually just answer it at length.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to go through several different outlets anymore.
Yeah, I think that's cool. That's cool for transparency of like, you can just see what they're talking about by talking to them. And that's perhaps something that used to be or could be just done in person. It doesn't have to be mediated through the faceless void of the internet, but
here we are. Along those lines of the vested money interests, I just think the way that different media outlets often kind of coordinate themselves is always, and not to get too conspiratorial, but there is something suspicious about the way that, say, Fox and CNN always kind of dovetail on a particular issue.
yeah.
And I think even, I guess, just awareness and noticing this is the only kind of solution. And then my final point about what the media does to shape elections, which might seem like the most trivial, but I actually think is one of the most important, is that it tells you when to laugh. It tells you what's funny, and it kind of shapes the comedy of those situations. Mm. And I think humor is a really important release valve during otherwise quite charged political moments. And when you are in the system of the late night shows and even the newspaper comics and SNL and all the various kind of entertainment comedic punditry, there is something inorganic and often, I'll just say very effective about that. Because, I mean, you tell someone how to laugh or when to laugh, you're also kind of just telling them how to feel about certain stories.
Yeah, I agree. And often, I mean, we saw this through the 2016 election in America of people just kept making fun of Trump, thinking that would make no one vote for him. But it made light of a lot of really dark things that he had done, that he was saying. It was making light of like, oh, we're going to build a wall. And it's like, are we going to talk about the fact that this is coming from a place of negative sentiment?
Also, I think it pushed a lot of people towards him because it seemed like an unfair, like, they're mocking this man, or they're mocking his ideas or whatever. I'm not making a statement on that, but I think there were a lot of people who felt that way.
Yeah, I think so. And then people were they were like, oh, it's not that bad, it's just funny, he's quirky, and like, we want someone who's quirky and fun and different. And like, that's not it, because we're not there witnessing him say these things, we just get the SNL skit about it, and then you're like, oh, maybe it's not that bad. Then you vote a way that you maybe wouldn't if you were actually exposed to just the facts instead of these storied narratives created about the facts.
But I mean, I think there are a lot of people who maybe would have been somewhere in the middle or undecided, who saw every single late night show and SNL skit piling on Trump, who kind of thought, I like him because he's being unfairly mocked in the media or whatever. Yeah. I mean, satire in politics is very essential, as I say. Like, I think it's an important release valve, and has been so since ancient Greece, maybe even since older times, that we make fun of the important people, and that's necessary to do so, and us peons should be allowed to do so. But there was just something about those vested interests telling us how to do so that I find questionable. I don't really have a solution to that besides, awareness and not looking to politics for everything, for all your kicks. Like, it's fun to laugh at it sometimes, but I mean, every night it's like this, we're gonna make these same jokes.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, it's just a bit boring, perhaps.
Yeah. hopefully this episode wasn't a bit boring. We'll see you next week to talk about more news.